Right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. This is part of our quarterly Seeklight training webinar series. Today, we'll be going through an overview of JSTOR Seeklight and its current functionality. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted to our YouTube channel, and the link to the recording will also be sent to all registrants by email. In the chat, we are sharing a handout that accompanies this webinar and includes additional resources, and you will also get a link to the handout in the post-webinar email. There we go. My name is Remus Jackson, and I am an Education Services Lead here at Ithaca. I'm joined today by my colleague, Elizabeth Berenz, who is also an Education Services Lead, and who will be helping me with the Q&A portion. After you exit the webinar today, you will be taken to a brief survey, and we'd really appreciate hearing your thoughts about how useful this was for you. This is a session that's going to run a couple of times a year, so definitely eager to hear how it can be made better. So definitely please fill out that survey if you don't mind taking a few minutes. So here is today's agenda. I'm going to begin by introducing what JSTOR Seeklight is and a little bit about the AI technologies it uses. And then I'm going to go through Seeklight to generate project summaries, transcripts, and item level metadata. Finally, I'll demo a couple different workflows for reviewing and editing your generated descriptions. We should also have about 15 minutes for a Q&A at the end, but feel free to ask questions as you think of them. You can ask questions through the chat, or there's a Q&A button you can use. Either way is fine. Questions you ask in the chat will be seen by everyone attending, while questions you ask through the Q&A button will only be visible to Elizabeth and I. And we will update that handout we shared with questions and answers after the webinar as well. And that is all the housekeeping. So we are going to turn off our cameras so that you can see my screen a little better. Righty. We'll figure out how to make this small. There we go. So first, what is Seeklight? JSTOR Seeklight is a collections processing tool that is built into the JSTOR Digital Stewardship Services Digital Asset Management System. It currently generates item-level descriptive metadata, project summaries, and text transcripts for items with text. Seeklight is AI-powered, by which I mean it uses AI models to generate these materials. So I do want to take a moment to introduce some concepts that'll help us understand what Seeklight does and how. So first, when I say AI, I'm referring to AI models, which are computational models that learn from data to produce predictions or decisions. And that learning process is called training. There's many kinds of AI models, but Seeklight specifically uses large language models, or LLMs. These are models that are trained on large, massive data sets, so billions of examples of text, in some cases the entire open internet, in order to produce or generate natural language text. The ways that LLMs generate text is based on probability. This is a very simplified explanation, but they calculate the most likely next word based on patterns they learned in training and the input they have been given. Input is usually a mix of instructions and context. So for example, we give Seeklight instructions that guide how it generates the metadata, and you provide context via the file that you upload. And like I said, this is very simplified, so apologies to the folks in the room that are much more AI literate. But I think the thing that's really helpful to understand about LLMs is that they generate text based on probability, right? That is sort of the key point. So when Seeklight generates, for example, a description field, it is generating the most likely next word over and over again until it reaches the most likely ending. And the way it determines that most likely next word is based on what it has learned in its training, combined with the instructions we have given it and the context you have provided. Now, Seeklight currently uses two main models, GPT 4.1 from OpenAI and Gemini 3 from Google. So these are the LLMs that it uses. That said, we have designed Seeklight to be model agnostic, so we are not dependent on any particular model. This means we can use different models for different parts of Seeklight's functionality, And we're able to change models if and when we need to make sure the output stays consistent and high quality. And we do regularly evaluate how these and other models are performing at what we're asking Seeklight to do. If this feels abstract to you, that's super fair. We're going to come back to these ideas as we go through Seeklight's functions. Now, as I mentioned, Seeklight is built into JSTOR Stewardship. So any item you upload into Stewardship, whether it is through Seeklight or not, is stored in what we call a project. So your projects are how you organize your item records in Stewardship. And those item records are media files and metadata associated with those files. So the project is where you control what happens to those item records, whether that's editing and reviewing, exporting, publishing them, or preserving them. So let's look again at what Seeklight currently does and how that fits in to the DAM and these projects. Seeklight's transcription for items with text works for any item in Stewardship, regardless of how your project is set up. So this means you can generate transcripts for items that you did not upload directly through Seeklight. Metadata generation and project summaries work a little bit differently. Right now, these features are tied to a specific project's metadata schema called the AI-compatible modified Dublin core schema. And typically, I call projects that are using this schema, this AI Dublin core schema, Seeklight compatible as a shorthand. So if you hear me refer to Seeklight compatible projects, or if you're reading the documentation and you see that phrase, that's what that means. It is a project that is using the AI-compatible Dublin core schema, which enables the metadata and project summary parts of Seeklight's functionality. So as I mentioned, projects are where your item records are stored and organized in the DAM. How you organize your projects is quite flexible. They can be one-to-one with your collections, but they do not have to be. Multiple projects can be published to the same collection, for example, and you can create multiple collections from the same project. So when thinking about how you want to organize your projects, you can also take Seeklight's project summary feature into account. The project summary is a high-level overview based on the current metadata in your project. It uses only the metadata in your project, so it's not doing a web search or anything like that to create it. So I'm going to show you how this looks. I'm going to switch to Stewardship. I'll go ahead and open that up, and we'll generate one together. So I'm on the home page of Stewardship, and I'm going to open up this Botanical Gazette project. And from this project, I'm going to select the project summary tab. It has the little sparkles that we like to use for Seeklight. I'm going to click the Generate Summary button. And hopefully everything plays nice and loads very quickly. There we go. So once it generates, you'll see there is an overview. It will attempt to give the assortment of items a title. It'll pull date information from the date field, the extent of the collection, any creator information that's in that creator field, languages from the language field, and then an abstract, a biographical and historical note, and a scope and content note. And I really want to emphasize, like I said, this is based on the metadata that is in your project. So it is extrapolating these details from that metadata itself. And the nice thing about this is that it can be regenerated anytime you add additional items to your project or edit a record. So let me go back to the metadata records and I'll show you that. So I'm going to open up this top record that is currently undated, but let's just say I know this one is from 1887. So I'm going to go ahead and make that edit to the date field and click Save. And then I'm going to come back to the Project Summary tab. And we'll see now there is an option. It lets me know the metadata has changed and I have the option to regenerate it. Now you cannot edit this project summary manually in this interface, but you can download it as a text file at any time. And it is yours to do with as you wish. Of course, if it is useful to you in this way, you can use it to help with finding aids or collection descriptions, things of that nature. But you can also use this material for internal reference. So, for example, if you've been donated a USB drive that has hundreds of photos on there, and you know they're photos, but you don't have the time to go through all of the photos and get a sense of the scope of what you've been given, you could upload those through Seeklight, and you'll get that item level metadata, but then you can come to the project summary tab and get a more holistic understanding of what you're working with. And this is why I want to encourage you to think about how you're organizing these projects. So maybe it makes more sense to break down a larger collection by series or folder or box to kind of get summaries at that level. Or maybe it makes more sense to combine things to get a more expansive summary, right? So we are going to stay in this project for a minute. This is a project that has items with text. So I'm going to transition us to talking about transcripts. I'm going to go ahead and open up a record that I know does not have a transcript. Where did he? There he is. Okay. I'm going to generate this transcript at the item level. You can generate transcripts at upload, which I will show you as well when we get there. But from this item page, I'm going to select the transcript tab, and then I'm going to click generate transcript. And once again, we're going to hope that it goes nice and fast. There we go. So there's some things to go over with these transcripts. They appear on the item page like this. You can search within them. So if I type in a word, it will highlight for me where in the transcript that word appears. You can edit these transcripts on this page. So if I click edit, it opens up pretty lightweight. What you see is what you get style editor. There's some light formatting you can do if you want to highlight or bold something, for instance, to match how it looks in the document. And of course, you can edit for accuracy. So I can zoom in on this item and make sure that it has done a decent job pulling it. Actually, it looks pretty good. Might want to take a double look at that, but you can kind of do that and make any changes, save them. You can download these transcripts as text or rich text transcript file types. You can download them from the item page like this or in bulk. So I'll show you how to bulk download in a minute. And then there's some additional options. You can upload your own transcript if you edit this out of interface, for instance, and then want to re-upload it, or if you have existing text transcripts for some of your items, you can upload those. If you make edits and need to revert to the original output, you can do so. And of course, you can always delete this if you no longer need it. What you can't do right now is publish to JSTOR directly. That is actively in progress. But in the meantime, in March, in the accessibility webinar, I went over some alternative options for displaying these transcripts on JSTOR. So I would recommend checking out that recording, as well as the support page for transcripts, which has some instructions there. So let's go back to the project, and I'm going to show you bulk download for these guys. So if I select all of these records, and I just sort of click this checkbox, I can come over to this overflow menu. And then one of my download options is transcripts. And if I select that, it'll let me know how many of the items have transcripts. And then I can choose whether to get them in text or rich text format, and I'll get emailed a zip file of those transcripts. So that is a quick little preview of transcripts, and I'm going to come back to my slides to talk a little about what Seeklight's transcription actually is and how it differs from a traditional OCR process. I think this would be... Wrong way. There we go. Okay. So a text transcript is an alternative to the original item. It's something that you present separately, right? So it's a little different from, say, a PDF that has OCR applied to it. OCR is a process. It stands for optical character recognition, and it is a process that makes text and image machine readable. So you can use OCR to make a transcript, but it is one technique of many, right? Now, Seeklight does not use OCR. It uses an LLM to transcribe text, that Gemini LLM. So just to kind of explain the difference, in traditional OCR, the engine that is doing that recognition looks at each character in isolation, right? So it's not looking at the whole word, it's not looking at the page, it's identifying a specific character, and it is attempting to match the shape of that character to a library of known characters. With an LLM, the transcription is a little different. The LLM is able to read each word in the context of the page, so it is actually seeing that whole page. It uses the context of the page and the patterns that it learned in training to interpret what it sees. So this is what this word is supposed to be shaped like, right? That kind of information. This is why LLMs tend to do better with historical and handwritten documents that traditional OCR engines struggle with, right? They're able to make pretty accurate predictions because they aren't just considering each letter in isolation. So if it's an unusual shape, there's no concern about it not matching that existing library. This also means, though, when you're reviewing and editing your transcripts, you're not going to see the same kind of errors you typically see with OCR. So, I'm sure we've all seen not very good OCR. Sometimes it interprets a character incorrectly. It'll give you an M instead of an N, things like that. And that's pretty easy to spot. It kind of jumps off at you, right? With an LLM, you're more likely to see everything spelled correctly, but the word is perhaps incorrect because it has made a bad prediction. That being said, Seeklight is designed to not guess or fill in gaps if it cannot determine a word. So it should just return to you brackets and question marks are unintelligible to let you know that word was unclear, which does reduce that sort of error. But I do think it's important when you're reviewing to kind of pay attention to the differences there. Alrighty. So we have touched on project summaries and transcriptions, which are both a little straightforward. And now we are going to talk about metadata, which is the big thing. So I'm going to switch us back to stewardship again and show you there are two main ways to upload items through Seeklight to get that metadata. So first, from within an existing project that is Seeklight compatible like this one, I can go to the Add button and then select Upload and generate metadata. I can also go back to the home page, and because I am an institutional admin, I can also use the button that says Upload Media and Generate Metadata on the home page. And this will take me directly to that Seeklight upload. So in other words, you can start with a project, either making a new project or working in an existing project that's Seeklight compatible, or you can start with an item upload, depending on if you prefer to take a project first or item first approach. And of course, there might be times where you want to do both or mix and match depending on your workflow. But for us, I will go ahead and go from the item first approach. So let's go through this upload page together. I'm going to go ahead and grab a folder of items and drag them to this upload. And once I add those items, they appear in this little box to the right of the upload. There's a couple of things to note here. The first is compound objects. So in Stewardship, a compound object is an item record that has multiple image files. So for Seeklight, those would be JPEG or TIFF files. And an example of that might be a photograph that has a front and a back, or a postcard, or if you digitize documents as TIFF files, and each page is kind of its own TIFF file, for instance, and you want those to be together as one item record. The stewardship system groups compound objects by file name. So it's looking for a shared file name of some kind and then numbers at the end. It is fairly flexible otherwise, as long as you are ending in those numbers. So you could do underscores or dashes, or as I have here, just numbers at the end. But to group them, I have to click Group by File Name. And I can see in this upload area that the icon here has changed to a folder, and it's telling me this is file DIY with 5 items under it. So I know this is going to be one item record with these 5 items. You can post-upload create compound objects by adding additional media files to an existing record. However, for Seeklight, in most cases, I imagine you want Seeklight to have access to all of the files that are going to create that record. So it's important to check that things are grouping the way you expect them to. And that you're actually hitting that group button, because there is not a way to, after the upload, combine item records. The other 2 things I'll call out are under additional processing. So the first is this checkbox for creating transcripts for written material. So as I mentioned, you can create transcripts in bulk at the upload. This is the only place where you can create those transcripts in bulk as opposed to item by item. So generally, we recommend just leaving this checked. If you have items that don't have text, it'll just tell you on the transcript page, no text detected. So there's no real harm of having it checked. And then the last thing is this optional context box. The context box is an optional input during upload where you can provide contextual information that Seeklight would not otherwise have access to in order to enrich your generated metadata. So for example, you might have a batch of photographs by the same photographer. Photographers typically do not sign their work. You could include that information in the context box, which would give Seeklight that information for the metadata it generates. Another thing that works really well are existing scope and content nodes if you have those. Whatever you put in this box is applied to all of the items in your upload. So use information that is relevant to all of the files you are uploading, and you might think about how to strategically batch your files, right? Under the context box, there is a button. It sort of looks like a clock with an arrow going the other way around. If I click that or select it, I can reuse any history I've previously provided. And you guys might see some silly context in here because I'm often experimenting with the context box. But if you select one of these, it'll automatically populate into this area, and then you can edit it. So that's really nice if you're iterating, for instance. The other thing you can do is pin context. So if you're using the same context across multiple uploads within a particular collection, once you enter it the first time, you'll be able to pin it, and it'll always appear at that top for you so that it's right there for you to click and apply. Now, in some cases, you might not need it at all if the items you're uploading are very rich in detail. However, in this case, I'm uploading a set of illustrations that accompany a specific podcast. The illustrations aren't signed or dated, and there's really no way for the tool to work out that they're from a podcast. It doesn't say podcast on there anywhere. So this is what I'm going to put in the context box, that these are cover illustrations that accompany episodes of the Comic Studies podcast, Drawing a Dialogue. All illustrations are created digitally in the program Procreate, so the tool knows how they're made. And then the artist is Remus Jackson, whose name should be written in lowercase, so giving it a little tiny bit of formatting instructions. And then I have a date span in here I want to use because I don't feel like looking up the specific dates for these yet, but I'm going to update this slightly to say circa 2014 to 2027 as opposed to just 2014 to 2027. And now I'm going to click upload. Since we went through item first, it's asking me if I want to create a new project using that AI compatible schema, or if I want to add to an existing project. And I will go ahead and make a new project and click generate metadata. And while this uploads, I want to switch back to my slides and explain how that upload process actually works. So first, what is Seeklight actually using to generate metadata? This will depend on the type of items that you have. For text and mixed items, meaning items that have text and images in pretty equal measure, Seeklight uses the item's full text up to about 40,000 words. If the item is a PDF that has existing OCR, Seeklight will extract that existing OCR to get the full text. If the item does not have OCR, so for instance, if it is TIFF or JPEG items, right, with text in them, Seeklight generates a transcript first to get the full text, and that is the same transcription process as if you request the transcript, right? So it kind of just does that step first. In addition to the full text, Seeklight uses the first 5 and last 2 pages of your item, or of course, all of the pages if it's smaller than that. And this lets Seeklight analyze the visual content of that item for contextual details that it might not get from the text itself. So it's able to kind of see how the text is laid out on the page and kind of take cues from that. Now for images, of course, Seeklight is using the image itself and doing that visual analysis. And for compound objects that are pure images, no text, it's going to use the first 5 and last 2, just like it does for the text type items. And for all item types, if you put anything in that context box, Seeklight's going to also use that. When you upload your item files, they're first classified into those types we just saw. At this step, Seeklight also flags if an item is a newspaper or has handwriting and does some more specific categorizing that'll help tailor its output later on. Next, after it's classified, the material from that file, so images, full text, and context if present, is routed to the LLM for metadata generation. So Seeklight is generating metadata for each item at a time. It's not looking at all of your items holistically to generate metadata, right? It's kind of running each item record as its own job. The LLM analyzes the file or files in the case of a compound object, and then uses specialized instructions or prompts for each field to generate the metadata for that field. These instructions are tailored to the item types, which is why that classification step is really important, because we are really doing some refined instructing to make that metadata output tailored to the correct item type. And then once that metadata has been generated, it is returned back to stewardship in the form of the item record. And hopefully by now, all of our records have finished uploading. So let me switch back to stewardship. Great, they did. Once I uploaded my files, the system automatically moved me to this activity monitor page on the generating tab, so I can see the status of that generation job. And what we're looking for is for these to say successfully generated in the status column, and they do. So we can click metadata records to go to our metadata records table. And there's a few things to talk about as we sort of move from uploading into reviewing, right? First, in these Seeklight compatible projects, any item that you upload through Seeklight has a tag that says AI generated. So this lets you know this is an item record that Seeklight created. The tags are only visible in the backend. They are for your use. There are 2 additional tags. The first is reviewed. So let me select one of these items and click Mark as reviewed. Once I do that, the system applies this reviewed tag. The reviewed tag can be removed at any time as well. So if I have this still selected, I can click where it says reviewed and it'll take it off. And the reviewed tag is really meant to be something that you can incorporate into your workflow at a place that makes sense, right? So it indicates that some sort of human review has happened, whether you want to use that prior to editing, after editing, to indicate things are ready for export. You know, you can apply it in different ways. It's meant to be quite flexible. The third tag is edited. So let me open up one of these records. And on the item page, we have all our generated metadata. And let's just say, I'm going to make up a date, that this is the May 2022 episode of the podcast. I'm going to hit save, and then I'm going to refresh the item page. And I can see that at the item level, the system has automatically applied this edited tag. That lets you know that some editing has happened, right? A human has done something to this record. And if you want to get specific, we can see that underneath the field itself, it says edited. So I know this is the specific field that someone has changed, right? Now, previously, you might have noticed it says confidence and then high, medium, or low. And if we look at these other fields, we can see that there are still confidence scores here. The confidence scores are present on almost every field that Seeklight generates. There is an exception I will talk about. And they are represented as high, medium, and low. The confidence scores come from the LLM itself, and they represent the LLM's assessment of the statistical likelihood that what it generated is accurate based on its instructions and the information it has available to it. We display those to you as high, medium, and low to give you a way to sort of triage and manage this metadata, especially if you're working with very many items, right? Now I do want to call out, let me see, in some cases, you will see in some fields, Seeklight will not return any data at all. So for instance, for publisher, this is left blank. That is because there is a minimum confidence threshold that must be met in order for Seeklight to return that metadata for you. So I call that out because I don't want you to see low confidence and think, oh no, it's making stuff up. It is hitting that minimum threshold in order to actually give you any information. And this is a guardrail that we have to prevent things like hallucinations or the LLM kind of making things up, right? And because we would much rather you just not get something than, you know, have to kind of work through a bunch of completely made up stuff, right? Now, the exception to the confidence scores that I want to call out is this subject field. The subject field is a little different from the other fields. Seeklight has access to a manually created and maintained currently list of Library of Congress subject headings. And on the subject field specifically, rather than generating text, it performs a semantic search on that list and returns up to 7 of what it believes to be the most relevant results. That means that the subjects field is returning Library of Congress subject headings. The thing to note with that is that it does not return subdivisions. So it will return everything to you as sort of a high-level term. If you are an institution that catalogs with Library of Congress, that is a good thing to be aware of. I just like to call it out, but I will show you a trick for sort of editing that metadata in bulk in a minute. Because on that note, I want to talk about a few example review and editing workflows. And I want to be clear that these are not exhaustive by any means, but I just want to give you some ideas to get started of how you can kind of adapt to the stewardship interface. So we just edited an individual item record, right? Pretty straightforward. I could keep going through this project, clicking next, checking the item, checking the metadata, making whatever edits I need to edit, checking the transcripts as well, see how it does with that. And that's pretty straightforward. But let's say I'm part of a team that has existing workflows for cataloging that include a few different stages or a few different groups. So I'm going to actually switch back to that Botanical Gazette project that we were in earlier. And from within this project, I'm going to open up the sets menu here to the side of the records. Sets are like folders within your project. You can use them to organize your item records. They have no impact on how items appear when published. They're just for organizing within the project. And I've created a handful of sets here to kind of give you a sense of these. And I want to pull item records into these depending on where they're at in my process of review. So for my process, I am mostly concerned about reviewing low confidence metadata in a few fields, let's say description, title, and creator. I'm going to make a filter to get to those records. So I'm going to click on the title column here, the filter icon, And then from here, I'm going to select low under confidence and apply that. And that's going to return whatever records are low confidence in that title. Now, one thing about filtering and stewardship is that the logic is and based, meaning if I try to filter at once for low confidence across all three fields, it's going to only show me records that hit that criteria in all three fields, as opposed to records that are in one or the, or low confidence description or low confidence title and so forth. So to get around that, I've set up some filters that I'll show you. But first, let me go ahead and add this one. So I'll select this item. I have these sets already created. So once I select it, I can go ahead and just click the plus sign to add it to initial review. And then I'm going to clear this filter. I'm going to click filters. And at the top here, I have some saved filters. So let me also go ahead and open up low confidence descriptions. Close that out. And then I'll also add these to the initial review. And now if we go into initial review, I can see it has those records that hit that criteria that I already added in here. Let me close out there we go. So we can actually see the low confidence title as well. Okay. Once I've done, let's say I go through and I do my initial review, I can go ahead and move this to first fast. So you can have items in multiple sets as well. So if I select one of these, let's say, and add it to first pass, I'm going to go ahead and keep it selected here for a second so that I can open this up, this overflow menu, and click remove from current set, just to make sure I'm not confusing myself later on. But this does mean you can set up sets in lots of different ways. So you can organize by workflow like this or group together. I also have some sets that are grouped by year. When you create a new set, so if I go to this overflow menu and hit create sets, I have the option to make them available to everyone who has access to this project, only some people or just myself, and you can put the same item in multiple sets as needed. So let's combine this with some batch editing. I'm going to go first pass edits and I'm going to export them. So if I wanted to do some spreadsheet editing, the advantage of this is that you can go through all of those records in a sheet and make any changes and then re-upload that sheet and have those edits applied rather than going record by record, right? So you can do this to do something like normalizing spellings or bulk updating specific terms. And I'm going to focus on the subjects field. So I would select these records. And then I would come over to the overflow menu again, these three dots next to mark as reviewed. And one of my options is download metadata. And if you select that, the system will generate a spreadsheet for you that has that metadata. I already have this guy downloaded for time's sake, so let me open it up. And I went ahead and kind of fiddled with it to make it hopefully a little more visible on my screen. And in this case, I want to kind of fix up this subjects field, right? So I'm going to go ahead and select this subjects field, come up to find and select, replace, and then I already have it in here. I'm going to find the term botany and replace it with botany periarticle, so it's a little more specific. So I'm just going to hit replace all. And let's say I also want to add a term that's not currently present. I'm going to go ahead and insert a column. And in this column, I'm going to take advantage of Excel's append text function. I should say I'm using Excel. This should work with any spreadsheet software that you prefer to use, as long as it supports an Excel file type. But I'm going to go ahead and in this empty column, I'm going to type an equal sign J, because that is my subjects column, 2, so that I get the specific cell, and then I'm going to put a space, a pipe, or a pip mark, and then I'm going to type plants periodical. So I'm adding this term as well. And what this does is it takes whatever text is already in here and then appends this new text to it. And then I can just drag this down so that that term has been added to all of these records. And what I'll just do is copy this and then paste it as a value. And then I'll go ahead and delete this column because I don't need it anymore. And now I have added that new term to this subjects without having to go through and copy and paste it a million times. I'll also go ahead. I noticed that for some reason, this particular record has article instead of journal article. So I'll go ahead and fix that. And then the publisher on this one was blank. So I'll go ahead and also fix that and save this. Now what I can do is come back into my project, and from the add button, I can click import metadata. I'll go ahead and I hope this is the correct spreadsheet. Is it in use? Interesting. Okay, let's try again. Okay. Click upload. And what that'll do is apply those updates I just made to those records for me all at once. I will give it a minute to work its magic, and hopefully it will not error out on anything I've done. There we go. And then I can see, let me go ahead and just filter this to edited. I can see those changes that I uploaded have been made for me. So like I said, that is a really quick run through of just a few different ways that you can use sets and filters together with bulk editing to kind of do some quick edits. But that is the end of my demo. And now we can do Q&A. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen and come back. Well, I'll keep my screen shared, but I will come back on camera and we will see if we got any questions.
Yes, we have a couple of questions. One about Library of Congress subject headings. I don't know, Remus, if you have more information about this, but the question is if you could speak about the maintenance process about Seeklight's support of Library of Congress subject headings. How often is it updated? Is there a process for submitting feedback and so on?
Yeah, so right now it is manually maintained. We are looking into how to move away from that towards something like an API, for instance, right, that we wouldn't have to worry about manually maintaining. In terms of submitting feedback, there's a few ways to do that. You are welcome to always email Lee Dodson or email support. Let them know if there's an issue, if you're seeing a term that's incorrect, and we can fix that for you. The other option is from within Stewardship. If you don't want to, leave the interface, you can select any number of records, and one of your options in this overflow menu is submit feedback. And that should open up a little feedback menu. You can pick a specific field and then let us know what the issue is. So you could say, this generated in these terms that are no longer accurate, or this term would be more appropriate, or things like that. And that'll go straight to our product team. So really, any way you'd like to give us feedback, we will be happy to take it.
Great. There's a follow-up also about whether we have any plans to expand Seeklight's support for LCGFT for genre and LCNAF for names.
I know that we have plans to expand controlled vocabulary support in general. I cannot speak to the specific lists that we're looking at, but again, if we kind of move towards that API model, it'd be a lot easier for us to incorporate additional controlled vocabularies as needed.
Great. Nothing else yet, but we have time if others have questions they'd like to type in.
Yeah, please. Oh, and just to echo, Lee added in the chat in terms of sharing feedback, we definitely, just to echo what Lee wrote, we definitely want to know if you are encountering any issues or have suggestions. And the sooner we know, the better. So you can reach out to us again via email, in the product, whatever way is the easiest for you. Do not hesitate, even if it feels like something small and inconsequential, we would like to know about it. But if there are no other questions, I'm also happy to give folks about 15 minutes back. So
I can put a quick plug in the chat also for our upcoming webinar schedule. If
Mhm.
you'd like to learn about other stewardship webinars, I'll just put a link in the chat to see if you'd like to see that schedule and register for any of those.
Yes, definitely check those out. And I will give another plug for as you are exiting to please fill out that feedback form. It's very helpful for us. All right. If you think of any questions, please reach out. You have Leah and Maya's contact information. It's also on that handout that we shared. But otherwise, enjoy the rest of your day.